The first assumption is that the first version of Aseret Sadibis were in the first luchas. The second version of Aseret Sadibis, which are in Pashas V'Eschanan, were in the second luchas. And on that basis, we're making another assumption. The first assumption says in Sfarim. The second assumption may just be us, okay? That the first Aseret Sadibis, which were the first luchas, were given to Yidden while they were tzaddikim. And the second Aseret Sadibis, which were in the second luchas, was given to the Jewish people after they were already Balei Tshuva, like we had in last week's Pasha, that the Eibishter gave them V'chet Egel. But Abal Tshuva is in a very different place than the tzaddik is. So we've been learning, this year we're doing Shabbos. And Kibbutz Avim I'm leaving for next year, okay? I really don't want to go till last year I went till the end of the year with Aseret Sadibis, I didn't even finish. So just doing Kibbutz Avim, just doing Shabbos, next year we'll do Kibbutz Avim, and we'll see after that how we're going to proceed. We're holding, if you have this side of the page, right, on the back side you have the differences, in the front you have the juxtaposition. We're doing, on the top, the first dibur, it's Kapitel Chaf Pasuk Tes, and the second dibur, it's Kapitel Hey Pasuk Yud Gimel. And in both of them, there's a list. You're not allowed to do work on Shabbos. You, your sons, your daughters, your slaves, your maids, your animals, and your converts. But in the second set, it says you, your sons, your daughters, your slaves, your maids, your oxen, your donkeys, all your animals, and your converts in the gates. Okay? It says in both. So what we're doing is we're analyzing why there are a number of differences between the first luchas and the second luchas. And the first one we're focusing is on the vav of ve'avdecha. In the first luchas, if you look at Kapitel Chav Pasuk Tes on top, it says, the seventh day of Shabbos to the Eibishter, le'tasakom malach, and now do any work, any correction in the world, ata you, bincha, your sons, b'techa, your daughters, avdecha, your slaves, v'amascha, your maidservants, avdecha, and your animals. Now in the second set, those words are the same except for one letter. In the second set, Kapitel Hey Pasuk Gimel, v'yayim hashvi, the seventh day, Shabbos l'Hashem Elokecha, Shabbos l'Eibishter, le'tasakom malach, do not do any work. Ata you, bincha, your and your sons, the and your daughters, and it says v'avdecha with a vav. So our question is, how come in the second set of luchas, when he's talking about not working on Shabbos, you can't work, your children can't work, your animals can't work, and even your children, your slaves can't work, and even your livestock is not allowed to do work? How come in the second set there's a vav ve'avdecha between you, your sons, and your daughters, and avdecha? So here's the insight that I'm offering, and you must appreciate this, that this is not, it's not Teres Emes. This is me using my imagination, trying to figure out, it's a nuance, it's the difference of one letter, but there's got to be a reason why in the second set of dibus there's a vav, and the first there isn't. And my position is as follows. The letter vav can be seen as connecting two things, and it can also be seen as separating between two things. Sometimes the vav makes things closer. Vav hachibur. The vav makes things closer. Sometimes the vav makes things more distant. Vav hamaf, the vav separates. I'm going to make the following point. The difference between tzaddikim and balei tshuva is more evident in the lower activities of the tzaddik versus the lower activities of the balei tshuva, as opposed to the higher activities of a tzaddik and the higher activities of Baal Tshuva. I'll explain to you what I mean, okay? A king. You're a new face. Who are you? What does that mean? I don't speak this language. You're two. You're officially allowed to be here. I'm very serious about these things over here. I'm trying to keep my anonymity. You're a shliach or a tutor? I'm going to find out. Is he a non-holosh? I'll let him stay in that. What do the people say? Is he on the team? Is he on the team? Is he on the team? Okay. Chassidus gives a mashal. A king, or for that matter, any important person, it needs things done. All kinds of things have to happen. You have to organize your financial affairs. You have to buy things. You have to sell things. You have to put things away. Then you also have to clean things up. Like for example, if you're cooking a meal, that's one of the examples which is sometimes brought in Chassidus. The fun part of cooking the meal is taking out the pots and pans, filling it with all the ingredients, and making the meal prepared. But then you have to wash the dishes, right? Then you have to throw out the garbage, and then you have to deal with the waste. So there's different kinds of jobs that take place in any complex system. And there's a criteria which is found in Chassidus, which is brought actually by Morim, which is, there are certain jobs that if the slave wouldn't do it, the master would do them himself. Certain jobs that are honorable jobs, they're becoming jobs. So you're the master, you have many slaves. So your slaves do things for you, but they're the kinds of things that if you didn't have slaves, you do them for yourself because they're honorable things. Then there are other things that if you didn't have someone to do it for you, you simply wouldn't do it because it's beneath your dignity. Cooking a meal is fun. Throwing out garbage, not so much. I'm just using that as an example. And the Maimonides Chassidus in the Mikneh from the Rebbe Rashab, which is a famous Maimed, he talks about the kind of activities that a slave does for a master, that if the slave wasn't there, the master would do them for himself, versus the kinds of things that a slave does for a master, that if the master wasn't there, the slave wasn't there, the master wouldn't do them. So how would you explain that in Avodah, right? In Avodah, Yid learns. In Avodah, Yid davens, right? In Avodah, Yid eats and sleeps. But in Avodah, does a Yid work? Now, most of us are supposed to work. If we didn't work, forget about us, right? But there is a category of people that are called B'nai Tovim, very, very special people, that it's literally beneath their dignity to have a regular job. Now, a job as a Reish HaKoil, a job as a Rav, that's a wonderful job. But a job, packing shelves or even running a business, it's not for them. So there's a criteria that there are certain kinds of work that is honorable, that would be done by honorable people, and there's another kind of work that honorable people would not do. Now, if you think about it in Ruchniyizdika terms, how would you think about this in Ruchniyizdika terms? In Ruchniyizdika terms, everything we're doing is serving Hashem. When you learn Torah, you're serving Hashem. When you're davening, you're serving Hashem. When you're engaged in commerce, which is mystically speaking called avodas habirurim, right? A person has a job who goes to work and works all day long and comes home at night, but he davens with a minyan in the morning and a minyan in the afternoon, and he's very precise in his avodas Hashem, is a wonderful person. But his Yiddishkeit is not on the level of learning Torah. His Yiddishkeit is not on the level of davening. His Yiddishkeit is on the level of elevating the world. So this becomes the question. What kind of a job is becoming of what kind of a neshama? So this is how I'm breaking it down. Tzaddikim, they're involved in holy things. But when you say that tzaddikim are involved in holy things, what you're trying to say is that everything a tzaddik does is holy. If you wanted an example for it, imagine being a servant of the Rebbe's. If you had the honor of serving the Rebbe, being one of the Rebbe's secretaries, is it beneath your dignity to take out the garbage? Or to use the example which is brought in Sfarim. In the Beis HaMikdash, they had ash on the Mizbeach. And the ash had to be taken off the Mizbeach and taken out of the camp and put in a disposal, which is called the Machon Tahir, outside of Yerushalayim. It was not a dignified job. You had to put on shmata clothes. The Kohen Gadol had to wear Big Day Kahuna, but he put on cheaper Big Day Kahuna when he did this task. And Rashi says, the Chazal say, it never happened that the Kohanim were lazy, forgive me for using this expression, to take out the garbage. The removal of the ash from the Beis HaMikdash, not to put it near the Mizbeach, which was a mitzvah, but to take it out of the camp was not considered a very holy job. But there was never an occasion, the entire history of the Beis HaMikdash was over 800 years, that there was no Kohen who volunteered for that job, even though it is taking out the garbage. But if you're taking out the garbage in the Beis HaMikdash, it's part of the avoid of the Beis HaMikdash itself. So if a person is on a holy level, not only are the holy activities holy, but the ordinary activities are holy. If a person is not on a holy level, so then holy stuff is still holy stuff. But taking out the garbage, that's not so holy. And this is how I'm explaining to the difference between the first set of the Aseres HaDibros and the second set of Aseres HaDibros. The first set of Aseres HaDibros speak to tzaddikim. Now tzaddikim have many levels. Tzaddikim do many things. Tzaddikim can be in the level of Ata, which I explained to last week. Api Kabbalah is the level of Chochmah, which I'm not going to repeat. Tzaddikim could be level of Bincha, your son. The level of your son means serving Hashem with your emotions. Tzaddikim could be the level of Bitcha, your daughter. Daughter means serving Hashem at the level of Kabbalah sale, but in holy activities. But then tzaddikim could do the work of an Eved. What do avodim do? They work to prepare things. They prepare things. The work of a slave is not in holiness directly, it's preparing things for holiness. And there's an Eved, which is one kind of a slave. There's an Amma, which is another kind of a slave. And one of the ideas, which I haven't yet explained to my satisfaction, and I don't know if I can, because according to Kabbalah, it should say Amma before Eved, in my opinion. And by the way, the other big thing is that I'm explaining that Eved and Amma means an Eved Ivri and an Amma Ivriya, which is probably just fundamentally wrong. But there are activities that a tzaddik is involved with that are not directly holy, because they're represented by work that's done by a slave, or even work that's done by an animal, or work that's done by a ger, by a non-Jew who's converted to Judaism. So when the Aseres HaDibros of the tzaddik, there's no vav. Look at the top of your page. The first half of your page, Kapitel Chav, Pasuk Tes, it says, "V'yayim ha'shvi Shabbos Hashem Elokecha l'tachzakol malacha." You should do any work. Ato uvincho v'tacha. The avdecha does not have a vav. You know why? Because in the realm of a tzaddik, not only are the holy activities holy, but the ordinary activities are also holy. So there's no vav, because the vav would separate. The vav would say there's different kind of work. There's work which is holier, there's work which is less holy, and Shabbos you're not allowed to do the more holy work, and Shabbos you're not allowed to do the less holy work. When it comes to tzaddikim, all work is equal. And I'm making a big deal of the lack of the vav before the word avdecha, which is the transition for the Kabbalists keeping score at home, and of course you're all Kabbalists, so you're all keeping score. The transition between Atzilus and the lower worlds, Ato Binchu Bitacha is Atzilus, Eved, Amma, Behema, Gate is the lower worlds. The fact that there's no vav between Bitcha and Avdecha is saying that in the world of Tzaddikim, even the ordinary things have a great Kedusha. There's holy work and there's not holy work, and in the world of Tzaddikim, unholy work is also work, and as it relates to Shabbos you can't do any of it. So I'm saying that the lack of a vav is connoting, is there to say by tzaddikim, every avodah that they do has a kedusha to it. And nevertheless, on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do it. When Shabbos comes, the avodah that tzaddikim do, if the avodah that tzaddikim do goes into the category of the word melacha, and the word melacha has been discussed at length in these classes. The word melacha means to change the world for the better. That's the translation of the word. Melacha means to make an improvement in the world. If you're taking the physical world and you're improving it, it's called melacha. Shabbos, there's no melacha. Shabbos, there's no melacha. Shabbos, you're above improving the world. The world you live in is perfect. Whether the things that you're improving is on a holy level, ata bincha bitacha, whether the things that you're improving are an unholy level, abdecha, moscha, bemtecha, vegercha. On Shabbos, the world is not being fixed. The world is perfect. And by the way, I just want to mention, and I probably mentioned it last week, but I forgot. Every time they talk about building the Beis HaMikdash, they mention Shabbos. In the Chumash, whenever they talk about building the Beis HaMikdash, they mention Shabbos. Because building the Beis HaMikdash represents mystically what we call in Chabad, Dira B'Tachtonim. Building the Beis HaMikdash is the beginning of making this world a home. On Shabbos, there's no Dira B'Tachtonim. On Shabbos, you're not making the Eibush at home. In Shabbos, you remove yourself, you're involved in holiness. So in the first set of Dibris, where the Eibush is talking to tzaddikim, that by a tzaddik, whether they're doing things which are holy or things which are not holy, even the unholy things in the world of a tzaddik are considered holy, there's no vav. The lack of a vav before v'avdecha is meant to indicate that the ordinary activities of tzaddikim are also on the level of tzaddikim, but on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do them. On Shabbos, even the avodah that tzaddikim do to fix the world, you're not allowed to do. The only thing a Shabbos, a tzaddik can do on Shabbos, is like the rest of us, which is rest. Be above malach. The second set of Aseret HaDibros is talking to the Baal Tshuva. In the world of the Baal Tshuva, the things that he does that are holier, like make tefillin, or shecht food that it should be kosher, is holier than, I don't know what, than cleaning the table, than taking out the garbage, than washing the dishes, just to give you examples. The place where you see the real difference between the tzaddik and the Baal Tshuva is not in the holy activities. The place where you see the real difference between the tzaddik and the Baal Tshuva is in the unholy activities. And that's why in the second Aseret HaDibros, you have the vav. That there's things that a Baal Tshuva do that are holy, there's things that Baal Tshuva do that are not holy, but if they constitute malacha, and the meaning of the word malacha is making a favorable improvement in the world, on Shabbos, there's no malacha. Shabbos, we raise them above any. We don't have to correct the world, not in holy areas, not in unholy areas. In Shabbos, we raise them above Malach. So that's my insight into the Vav. When I prepared it, it was much more exciting than when I delivered it. But that's my insight into the Vav. Now, next issue I want to talk about, this is the second topic that we're going to raise. By the tzaddik, it only says one word for an animal, right? It says, look at the first set of dibros. It says, "Leitazek hamalacha, do not do any work. Ata you, bincha your son, bitcha your daughter, avdecha your slave, amascha your maidservant, uvehemtecha and your animal." By the Baal Tshuva, you have three words for animal. Look at the lower half of this side of your sheet. It says, "V'sheishes yamim v'yein ma'shvi Shabbat Hashem l'kacha." The seventh day is Shabbos. Leitazek hamalacha, ata bincha b'techa ve'avdecha ve'amascha. Then we say next, v'sharcha v'chamarcha v'chol b'emtecha. So the Baal Tshuva has three extra words. He has the word v'sharcha, which the tzaddik doesn't have. He has the word v'chamarcha that the tzaddik doesn't have, and he has the word v'chol. Because by the tzaddik it only says uvehemtecha. Okay? So what's the obvious difference between the resting of on Shabbos of a tzaddik and the resting of a Baal Tshuva on Shabbos? That when a tzaddik rests on Shabbos, an animal is an animal is an animal. When a Baal Tshuva rests on Shabbos, there's a kosher animal, Sher is a kosher animal, and Chamer is a treifa animal. And when the Eibusha speaks to the Baal Tshuva, he says separately, when you rest on Shabbos, it's not enough that you rest, your animal has to rest. And not only your kosher animal has to rest, your treifa animal has to rest as a separate allusion. Okay, now let me explain this to you, okay? Treif is not entirely treif. There's only one kind of treif which is entirely treif. Only one kind of treif which is totally and absolutely treif, and that is avodah zarah. Because avodah zarah you're not allowed to have pleasure from, even if your life depends on it. If a person's going to lose his life unless he can benefit from avodah zarah, al pi halacha, he has to lose his life. He's not allowed to have. If there's a medicine, listen to this. If there's a medicine that could save your life, which comes from avodah zarah, and without it a person dies, it's also to take that medicine. That's the din. It's scary, but it's true. Besides for that, pikuach nefesh dech kol ater kula. You save a life. But a treifa animal is not treif. You can't eat a donkey, right? But you could ride on one. So there's ways of using a treifa animal as kosher. I mean, almost every creation the Eibishter made, I should take out the word almost. Every creation that the Eibishter made is there to serve us. If they didn't serve us, God would not have made them. Even predatory animals. Every animal that Hashem made was made, the Mishnah says, Kol Masha Nibresi, what's the Lashon? Everything that Eibishter made, he made to serve the Jewish people, the human beings, and the human beings are meant to serve the Eibishter. So there's no such thing an animal which is so treif that a Yid cannot have hana from. The only exception, as I mentioned, is avodah zarah. Now, so a kosher animal you can actually kill and eat if you shecht it properly and the shechita is good, and you kasher it correctly, and you cook it the way you're supposed to. So you can eat it. A treifa animal you can't eat, and if chas v'shalom a person eats a treifa animal, it says in Tanya, chapter 8, in the beginning, the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that if a person eats treifa meat, thinking that it's kosher, he made a mistake. He ate treifa meat thinking that it's kosher, and he ate it b'kavana l'shem shamayim with the holiest of intention, that treifa meat sits in his stomach like rocks. As they state in Tanya, it's very scary. You can't elevate specifically food. Treif is treif is treif. But there are so many ways to use a non-kosher animal that are kosher, like riding on a donkey, using the donkey or the camel to pull a plow or to pull a wagon. I mean, you can use non-kosher animals for innumerable tasks that are legit. You can use horses for all kinds of purposes that are kosher. So a Yid in his avodas Hashem uses animals whose klipa is less. The klipa is so much less that under certain conditions they can actually eat it. And they use it, Yid in his avodas Hashem, he uses animals that the klipa is more. But they're allowed. So the Pasuk is saying that when it comes to the level of tzaddikim, the difference between a kosher animal and a treifa animal is not noticed. For the same reason that there's no vav in the first Chassidus Adibris. Because by the tzaddik, his holy activities and his parochial activities are all holy. His involvement with animals, or to put it in avoided terms, his involvement with klipa, his involvement with things that are not overtly holy, whether it's the kind of klipa that could be elevated by consuming it, or it's the kind of klipa that cannot be elevated by consuming it can only be elevated by a lesser way, is all the same. So the first set of commandments, when the Eibush is speaking to a tzaddik about his animal resting on Shabbos, he says, let your animals rest. He doesn't specify what kind of animal. Because whatever kind of animal it is, to the tzaddik it's the same, it's an animal. Animals do ordinary things. Animals are not learning Torah. Animals do what animals do. And to the tzaddik, an animal is an animal is an animal. He's obviously using the animal in a kosher way. He's not going to use the animal way which is not kosher. And on Shabbos, the Eibush tells him, not only you have to rest, your animal has to rest. When it comes to Baal Tshuva, it's a whole other story. Baal Tshuva suffer from their animals much, much more. I'll tell you in a moment the story. So Torah specifies, when Shabbos comes, your kosher animal has to rest. Shoyrcha. When Shabbos comes, your treif animal has to rest. Chamoircha. And then it says a third time, v'chol be'emtecha. The unit of kosher and non-kosher animals, as they're one, kol be'emtecha, as they're included in one, also has to rest. There's a story with Alter Rebbe, which is a very, very appropriate story. That Reb Shmuel Munkes, everybody's heard the name of Reb Shmuel Munkes. Shmuel Munkes was a very, very big chassid. I heard from my teacher, Rabbi Fuchs, who taught me 49 years ago. In 1976, he taught me in Masechta Bava Basra, my first yeshivish in Masechta. So Rabbi Fuchs told us, I don't know if it was then or later, but that the previous Rebbe said once at the Fabringen, he heard it directly from the Frierdiker Rebbe, Amezog Shmuel Munkes meg mezog Rebbe. When you say Shmuel Munkes, it's okay to say Rebbe Shmuel Munkes, because he had Gili Eliyahu. Eliyahu Anova used to frequent him. Eliyahu visits me. Pesach is going to visit me. My son's Bris Milah visits me, but somehow the communication is not so good. The Shmuel Munkes was Saul Eliyahu. So Shmuel Munkes heard about the Alter Rebbe. He was a big Baal Madreg. The Frierdiker Rebbe said, Amezog Shmuel Munkes meg mezog Rebbe. And I heard it second hand. I heard it from an Eidriyah. A kid said, Rabbi Shmuel Munkes was a very big Baal Madrege. He was a very ruchnizdike yid. And by the way, in spite of the stupid stories they tell about him about the eggs, he was an alman. He didn't have a wife. He was alone by himself for many years with one daughter. He didn't have a wife. He lived alone. And it's a whole story about he married his daughter off. It's a different passion. And it looks like he lived a pretty long life, Shmuel Munkes. He was Meirech Yamav. I think he lived in times of the Mittler Rebbe. Maybe even the Tzemach Tzedek. I do not know if he went to Lubavitch, but he was something else. Shmuel was in a different kind of category. He went around making jokes, but he was no jester. He heard about the Alter Rebbe when he was not young anymore. He was probably in his 30s, which in that generation was today like 50. He was not young. And when he heard about the Alter Rebbe, and he was a maven, and it didn't take him a lot to realize what emes was. So he sniffed out that the Alter Rebbe is emes, and he decided to go to Lashon to meet the Alter Rebbe. But the people who informed about the Alter Rebbe told him that getting into the Alter Rebbe it's worse than trying to see a medical specialist in the ages of the HMOs and the gatekeepers. The Alter Rebbe had a whole hierarchy. You couldn't see the Alter Rebbe until you passed through one shliach and a second shliach. The Alter Rebbe had a whole system of people who would meet you before you met him. But Shmuel Munkes didn't want any mamutza. He didn't want anybody to help him. He wanted to go to the Alter Rebbe without anybody in between. So what do you do? Shmuel Munkes was Shmuel Munkes. So it was once a freezing winter night. He came to Liazne. I was living in Liazne before Liadi. And he looked for the Alter Rebbe's house. There were two simonim that he knew about the Alter Rebbe's house. Number one, if it's the Alter Rebbe's house, the light is going to be on because the Alter Rebbe is not sleeping, he's learning a Torah. Number two, the Alter Rebbe lived in a split level, lived in a two floor house, or a floor and a half. In the shtetl, there was no such thing as multi-story homes because land was very easy and architecture was very primitive. So they built simple homes. The Alter Rebbe had a 2-story house, or a story and a half. So these were his two signs. Anyway, he comes to Lozhne, he's watching through the streets, and sure enough, he sees the Alter Rebbe's house, and he sees where the light is on. There was a drain pipe running the house this vertically. So he grabs hold of the drain pipe, and he raises himself up. He opens up the window, and he plops down into the Alter Rebbe's room, and he closes the window. Alter Rebbe looks up and sees a guy, but he came in Shmuel Munkes style, this big heavy fur hat, a big heavy fur coat, boots, and more than snow for a machaya, for a whole apartment. This was Shmuel Munkes. And the Alter Rebbe says, yeah. So he says to the Alter Rebbe, he snaps. A Yid comes in for the cold and you ask him, yeah? This was his first word. A Yid comes in for the cold, this is what you tell him? Yeah. Okay, so Alter Rebbe gets quiet. Anyway, the apartment was warm. And eventually the snow melted and he warmed up. So he started to make himself comfortable. He took off his coat, took off his scarf. And so the Alter Rebbe says to him, and now you're already warm, now you can go. He says, I'm not going. Alter Rebbe says, I don't understand. You told me you wanted to warm up. I appreciate that, but now you're warm. This is my office. I'm sitting and learning at 4 o'clock in the morning. Would you leave me be? I'm not going. So the Alter Rebbe says to him, if you won't go, I'm going to bring in the goy, is going to kick you out. Shmuel Munkes was waiting for this. And the Alter Rebbe probably had a pretty good idea what was going to happen also. He said, the Rebbe, mein goy is gresse wie dein goy. He said, Rebbe, the one thing that I'm better at you is in the goy department. My goy is better than your goy. In other words, your goy is the kicking of my goy. Rebbe, mein goy is gresse wie dein goy. And the Alter Rebbe took him to Yechidus right away. That's the story. In other words, when it comes to the nisyonis, with the nefesh habahamis, with the animal soul, obviously the Baal Tshuva suffers much more. So the pasuk, when it describes the resting on Shabbos of the Baal Tshuva, doesn't say the animal rests. He says the kosher animal rests, the treifa animal rests, and all the animals rest, specifying that we have different kinds of nisyonis. I mean, what's a kosher yetzer hara and what's a treifa yetzer hara? What's a kosher yetzer hara? A kosher yetzer hara means an avedi you've never yet done. And the yetzer hara comes along and you tell him no. A kosher yetzer hara, the yetzer hara comes along and says, this is kosher, this is allowed. Why don't you enjoy it? It's not an aveda, but it's not exactly necessary for you. Yeah? A treifa yetzer hara is the yetzer hara of the repeat offender. It's the aveda he did last week and last month and a year ago, and he comes back to you. And we all know the Chazal say, Ava v'shana. Person does the same aveda over and over again, nas like a heter, it becomes very difficult. That's the treifa animal. By a tzaddik, an animal is an animal is an animal. So when the Torah describes the first set of luchas, first set of zadibris, that an animal has to rest on Shabbat, it says uvehemtecha. It doesn't even say v'chol b'hemtecha, your animal. Because by a tzaddik, whether it's an animal that's involved in things that are kosher, or it's an animal which is involved in things which are not so kosher, to the tzaddik it's the same, because he's not involved with the animal in a way that he struggles with the animal. When the Baal Tshuva is told that on Shabbos you have to rest, they specify the kosher animal has to rest, means to say the nefesh habahamis that's wanting you to do things that are allowed has to rest. The treifa animal has to rest. That means the nefesh habahamis that wants you to do things you're not allowed to do also has to rest. And the kol b'emtecha, all the animals, as a third idea, the kosher animals and the treifa animals as a collective also have to rest on Shabbos. And I'll explain it to you in avodah terms. In avodah terms. What does it mean, a kosher animal? What does it mean, a kosher animal? A kosher animal means, for example, this food, and it's kosher, and you're eating it. It's food, and it's kosher, and you're eating it. But you are not particularly lustful of this food. You don't love this food so much. So how difficult is it for you to eat that food l'shem shamayim? You're eating it because you need to eat. If you're eating because you need to eat, it's still food. Food is not Torah, but the elevation of that food is easy. Yeah.
That's why she.
Yeah, of course. You didn't know, huh? Then there's food. You try going to Birwa for a while. Then there's food which you're very tested by, and maybe it's not so healthy, but you're lustful of it. That food you're not supposed to eat, or you're supposed to eat it in a moderate way, in a controlled way that it could be helpful, and not too much of it and all that. That's a treifa animal. Or to say it in different words, a treifa animal in avodas habirurim is tshuva. Person makes a mistake. There's an aveda, and if you have to do an aveda, you have to do tshuva. When you do tshuva, you're making a treifa animal kosher. All of this is called malacha. All of this is called malacha. If a person is doing birur, a person is elevating physical things. If a person is doing tshuva for avedas that he did, that's called malacha. Malacha means a positive correction in the world. And on Shabbos, there's no malacha. Shabbos is no tshuva. The only kind of tshuva you're allowed to do on Shabbos is the higher tshuva, which is above work. But the tshuva has to do with the fight with the Yetzer Hara. The tshuva has to do with the regret and the pain you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Because on Shabbos you have to be besimcha. Shabbos you have to have oinik, simcha and oinik, joy and pleasure, mostly pleasure. So the tzaddik is told, let your animal rest. Whatever avodah you have that's connected to animalism, in other words, things that are in the physical world that are not directly holy, that you have to elevate, on Shabbos they rest. On Shabbos, the food you eat is holy, as they state in Gemara. And in Chassidus, the food you eat on Shabbos is not a birur. You're not elevating the food, it's considered holy food. Your animal and the animal's involvement in the world to elevate it is resting on Shabbos. The Baal Tshuva is told your kosher animal rests, your treif animal rests, and all your animal rests. There's three separate statements. The kosher animal rest means the Baal Tshuva's involvement in correcting the world by struggling with things that are kosher. And the treif animal, the Baal Tshuva's involvement with things in the world which are not kosher, which either he's staying away from against great tests, or he's doing tshuva to correct the fact that he made the mistake yesterday. On Shabbos that rests. And finally, by the Baal Tshuva it says, V'chol be'emtecha, not only does his kosher animal rest and his treif animal rest, there's a concept of kol be'emtecha. The way all the animals, the kosher animal, the not kosher animal, are included in a third category. There's a lot of different ways of explaining kol be'emtecha. Maybe it's like an aliyah after an aliyah. But the fact that by the Baal Tshuva so many details are brought is because the Baal Tshuva, each one of these things is a separate malacha. For an ordinary person, we do a lot of things. Each one of those things, in terms of Avodas Hashem, one is closer to the Eibishter, one is farther from the Eibishter. So the Torah specifies, spells it out separately. And by the tzaddik, whatever he does is holy. So there's far fewer details that are listed in the psukim because whatever he's doing is the same category. And it begins with the vav of avdecha. That in the first luchas there's no vav, because the first luchas is speaking to a tzaddik, and by a tzaddik even ordinary activities are holy. And it continues with the 3 points we just made, that by the tzaddik it says your animal rests, and by the Baal Tshuva it says your kosher animal rests, your treif animal rests, and all your animals rest. And we will continue this in Mitzvah Hashem next week. Hazak.